This video will not judge you, but it will confront you. It will unravel the quiet patterns you've been living inside for far too long, the ones that shaped your behavior before you ever learned to recognize them. You've been told your whole life that kindness is the highest virtue, that softness is admirable, that patience is moral, and somewhere along the way, you were conditioned to believe that the most acceptable version of you is the one who bends, the agreeable one, the accommodating one, the person who absorbs discomfort, so others don't have to. Here is the real problem nobody warned you about. Softness without boundaries eventually becomes self-destruction. Not because softness is wrong, but because softness offered to the wrong people becomes ammunition they never earned. And deep down, you already know this. You've lived this. Think for a moment about your own body when conflict enters the room. Think about how fast the tension rises in your chest. Think about how carefully you watch other people's expressions. Think about how easily your desires shrink when someone else's expectations grow. You tell yourself you're being kind, but your body knows you're being threatened, or at the very least, overpowered. You don't bend out of generosity. You bend out of conditioning. You bend because someone along the way convinced you that standing firm is somehow cruel. You bend because you learned that other people's comfort matters more than your own stability. You bend because you were raised to believe that good people don't push back. But here is a truth you can no longer afford to ignore. If you're not prepared to be ruthless, you will always obey someone who is. And ruthlessness, despite what you were taught, is not about cruelty. It is about clarity. Clarity about what you want, what you tolerate, what you value, and what you refuse to sacrifice anymore. Ruthlessness is not the removal of compassion. It is the refusal to let your compassion be weaponized against you. Most people do not fear cruelty. Most people fear clarity, because clarity exposes the truth about your relationships, your limits, and your own role in your suffering. The question you need to face now is simple and devastating. How much of your life has been lived according to your preferences, and how much has been lived according to someone else's will? Stay with me. We're only beginning. Nothing in your personality is accidental. People who struggle to say no did not choose that trait. They were trained into it. Your nervous system learned, long before you had language for it, that compliance equals safety. If someone around you was unpredictable, reactive, controlling, or disappointed easily, your brain learned that your survival depended on minimizing their emotional fluctuations. This is why conflict feels physically painful to you. This is why someone else's tension becomes yours. This is why the smallest argument floods you with anxiety. Your nervous system became an antenna tuned to the emotions of everyone around you. You watch the tone. You notice micro-expressions. You adjust your behavior before anyone asks you to. This is not empathy. This is survival intelligence. Your body has been operating on a core belief that has never been questioned. If I avoid confrontation, I avoid danger. And this belief served you once, but now it is the belief that keeps you small. Because here is the psychological trap you've been stuck in. Your mind wants autonomy, but your nervous system wants safety. Your voice wants expression, but your body wants silence. Your identity wants strength, but your conditioning demands compliance. You are living in a constant tug-of-war between who you are and who you were trained to be. And this internal war produces a specific emotional state, a state you know intimately. It's that quiet exhaustion that hits the moment you get home after spending a day saying yes when you wanted to say no. It's the heaviness in your chest after a conversation where you felt yourself shrinking to avoid conflict. It's the resentment you swallow when someone crosses your boundaries because you were too afraid to defend them. You tell yourself you're being understanding. You tell yourself you're keeping the peace, but in reality, you're sacrificing your dignity in the hopes that someone else will finally notice your discomfort. They almost never do, because people are not trained to respect boundaries you don't enforce. People treat your silence as consent. People assume your compliance is comfort. People interpret your hesitation as permission. You have been living as though your discomfort is invisible. And every time you bend, someone stronger steps into the space you leave behind. Not because they're malicious, but because that is human nature. If you don't occupy your space, someone else will. If you don't define your boundaries, someone else defines them for you. If you don't assert your needs, someone else's needs will dominate your time, your emotions, and eventually your life. This is the psychological truth most people never confront. A boundary unspoken is not a boundary at all. And every person who refuses to set boundaries eventually reaches a moment, one singular moment, where everything changes. We call this the breaking point. We'll get there soon. Let's confront the difficult reality you've been avoiding. The world you wish existed and the world you actually live in are not the same place. You wish we lived in a world where kindness was rewarded, where fairness was the norm, where empathy led to connection instead of exploitation. You imagine a world where if you treat others with respect, they will instinctively return it. But this is not the world you live in. In the real world, people respect clarity, not softness. People respond to consequences, not requests. People listen to boundaries only when those boundaries are enforced. People value what is scarce, not what is endlessly available. People push as far as you allow them to push. This is not negative. This is a psychological fact. Human nature is hierarchical, emotional, and power-sensitive. Humans instinctively notice who leads and who follows, who hesitates and who decides, who sets boundaries and who submits. And here is the part most people never realize. You communicate more through your limits than through your kindness. Your silence speaks. Your lack of resistance speaks. Your willingness to bend speaks. Your inability to say no screams. And whether you see it or not, people respond accordingly. This is why someone takes advantage of your patience. This is why someone sees your flexibility as weakness. This is why someone assumes they can push your limits without consequence. This is why someone confidently occupies space you never learned to claim. You may call it unfair, but fairness is not a universal law. It is a social agreement enforced by strength. This is where philosophy becomes unavoidable. Machiavelli, a well-renowned philosopher, didn't encourage people to become evil. He warned that people who rely solely on goodness will be dominated by those who rely on strength. He wasn't instructing you to harm others. He was urging you to protect yourself. Because in any society, the decisive, not the kind, are the ones who shape outcomes. And here is the existential question you must ask yourself. If your life continues in the direction it's heading, whose decisions will you be living under? Yours or someone else's? Sit with that question. It should unsettle you. It should stir memories you've buried. It should reveal patterns you've been avoiding. Because this is the truth most people spend their entire life running from. If you do not choose your role, someone else will assign it to you. You fear the word ruthless because you've been taught to associate it with cruelty. But cruelty and ruthlessness are not the same, and confusing them has kept you powerless. Cruelty is the desire to harm others. Ruthlessness is the refusal to be harmed by others. Cruelty is emotional immaturity. Ruthlessness is emotional clarity. Cruelty destroys relationships. Ruthlessness protects dignity. You fear becoming ruthless because you think it will make you heartless. But that fear misunderstands the purpose of strength. Strength is not the rejection of compassion. It is the structure that allows compassion to exist without breaking you. Here is the truth you've never allowed yourself to embrace. Ruthlessness is simply the courage to stop apologizing for protecting yourself. It is the willingness to walk away when a situation threatens your well-being. It is the ability to say no without explaining yourself. It is the clarity to defend your boundaries without guilt. It is the discipline to choose long-term respect over short-term approval. When you develop this form of inner firmness, something profound happens. The people who once manipulated you lose their leverage. The people who once intimidated you lose their power. The people who relied on your silence become unsettled by your honesty. They call you ruthless only because you stopped being available for their benefit. What they actually mean is, you became someone I can no longer control. Your transformation frightens them not because you are becoming cruel, but because you are becoming sovereign. And sovereignty, true self-ownership, is always perceived as a threat by those who depended on your obedience. This is the beginning of your evolution. This is where clarity becomes power. This is where your softness becomes protected instead of exploited. This is where the old version of you begins to die, and the necessary version of you begins to emerge. Every person who has lived their life bending eventually reaches a very specific moment. A moment that doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but internally it feels like a seismic rupture. It's not anger. It's not rage. It's not even heartbreak. It's a sudden and total collapse of tolerance. The breaking point is quiet. It happens internally long before it's visible externally. Your breaking point arrives the day your nervous system simply refuses to keep carrying everyone else's emotional load. It arrives when exhaustion overtakes fear, when resentment outweighs guilt, when your need for self-preservation finally becomes stronger than your desire to be understood. People imagine the breaking point as a loud explosion, but for kind people, it's almost always the opposite. It's silence. It's that moment where you stop justifying, you stop explaining, you stop negotiating, you stop giving warnings. Something in you that spent years politely asking for respect finally realizes it has been wasting breath. Your breaking point is not when you get angry at others. Your breaking point is when you get disappointed in yourself. You realize you've been participating in your own disrespect. You recognize that the pain you felt wasn't just caused by others. It was maintained by your inability to walk away. You see clearly, often for the first time, the role you played in keeping yourself small. And this realization hits with a sharp, cold clarity. I can't live like this anymore. Those 6 words mark the death of your old identity, not metaphorically, psychologically. After this moment, your behavior changes in ways that feel irreversible. You stop oversharing. You stop people-pleasing. You stop defending your decisions. You stop seeking validation. You stop absorbing guilt that isn't yours. You become someone others barely recognize, someone less available, less predictable, less controllable. And because people were accustomed to your softness, they interpret your new boundaries as aggression. They mislabel your assertiveness as cruelty. They call your detachment cold. They accuse you of changing, as if change is a betrayal rather than evolution. But what they're really experiencing is this. For the first time in your life, you are protecting your peace without asking for permission. The breaking point is not the end. It is the beginning. The birth of the person you were always meant to be. One of the most profound shifts that happens after the breaking point is the collapse of your need for approval. This shift is psychological, physiological, and behavioral all at once. You begin to see, often with brutal clarity, how much of your past life was shaped by the silent desperation for acceptance. You didn't want approval because you were weak. You wanted approval because you were conditioned to believe that acceptance equals safety. But once your inner landscape changes, something else changes with it. Approval stops feeling like oxygen. You realize you can survive without it. You realize you can think, act, decide, and breathe without someone else's validation cushioning your choices. The absence of approval no longer threatens your identity. It no longer endangers your sense of self. It no longer dictates your emotional climate. This is why people who knew the old version of you become confused. You stop communicating in ways that comfort their ego. You stop tailoring your tone to avoid upsetting them. You stop giving explanations to soothe their insecurities. And most importantly, you stop living in reaction to their expectations. Approval becomes optional. Disapproval becomes irrelevant. Something inside you shifts from external to internal authority, and that shift changes everything. You start noticing how many conversations used to drain you. You notice the people who only contacted you when they needed something. You notice the imbalance in the relationships you used to tolerate. You notice the way certain individuals relied on your fear of upsetting them. You notice the manipulation, the guilt trips, the subtle power plays. Once you see them, you can't unsee them. And this new clarity reveals something even more powerful. You finally understand that anyone who benefits from your lack of boundaries will interpret your self-respect as disrespect. But that's not your burden anymore. You no longer negotiate your value. You no longer shrink yourself to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. You no longer offer emotional labor as a currency for belonging. You no longer trade your authenticity for temporary harmony. Your attention becomes selective. Your energy becomes protected. Your time becomes expensive. This is not arrogance. This is psychological maturity. You have stopped chasing approval because you finally understand the truth. Approval is cheap. Respect is earned. And self-respect is priceless. After everything you've been through, after everything you've endured, after all the emotional weight you carried for years, there is a point where you stop being vulnerable to manipulation. Not because you become cynical, not because you become distrustful, but because you become self-sufficient. Manipulation thrives on emotional dependency. It requires a person who fears disapproval or abandonment. It relies on your desire to be liked or understood. It needs your guilt, your hope, your empathy. When you detach from the need for approval, manipulation loses its foundation. Suddenly, guilt doesn't work on you. Pressure doesn't work on you. Silent treatment doesn't work on you. Emotional volatility doesn't work on you. Backhanded compliments don't work on you. Threats of disconnection don't work on you. Why? Because you finally understand the truth. Anyone who leaves when you enforce a boundary was never there for your well-being. They were there for the benefits your lack of boundaries provided. This realization destroys manipulation at its roots. You begin to see people's intentions with clarity. You see who respects you, who uses you, who values you, and who fears losing control of you. You stop confusing attention with respect. You stop confusing familiarity with loyalty. You stop confusing neediness with love. And because you can't be manipulated, you become difficult to exploit. You become difficult to predict. You become difficult to influence. This shift scares people who relied on your compliance. It confuses people who relied on your softness. It exposes people who relied on your silence. You're no longer the person they built their comfort around. You become someone else entirely. Someone stronger, someone steadier, someone clearer, someone they can't manipulate anymore. When people hear the word ruthless, they imagine ruthlessness as aggression, domination, or cold-hearted ambition. But that is an illusion created by people who fear assertiveness. True ruthlessness, psychologically, philosophically, existentially, means something else entirely. Ruthlessness is clarity. The clarity to see reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. Ruthlessness is decisiveness. The decisiveness to take action without waiting for reassurance or permission. Ruthlessness is self-loyalty. the willingness to protect your peace even when others dislike you for it. A ruthless person is not unkind. They are undeceived. They are no longer manipulated by guilt, no longer confused by mixed signals, no longer blinded by wishful thinking, no longer weakened by the fear of disappointing others. Ruthlessness is the ability to do what the situation requires, not what your conditioning prefers. If a situation requires distance, you create distance. If a situation requires honesty, you deliver honesty. If a situation requires walking away, you walk away. If a situation requires a no, you say no. This is the inner power that most people avoid because it demands responsibility. It demands self-awareness. It demands emotional independence. It demands the death of the victim mindset. But once you adopt this mindset, your entire world changes. People who once controlled the conversation fall silent. People who once expected obedience recalibrate their tone. People who once relied on your hesitation now face your certainty. People who once treated you as replaceable suddenly recognize your value, not because you became harder, but because you finally became whole. This is the philosophical essence. Ruthlessness is the end of fragmentation and the beginning of self-integration. You no longer abandon yourself to keep others comfortable. You no longer negotiate your worth. You no longer outsource your decisions. You no longer dilute your identity. You become someone no one can exploit. Someone no one can intimidate. Someone no one can guilt into submission. This is not a transformation, this is a reclamation. There is a stage of growth that feels almost surreal. A stage where you wake up one morning and realize that the old version of you is completely gone. Not faded, not improved, gone. The version of you that over-explained has disappeared. The version of you that needed approval has dissolved. The version of you that feared rejection has become irrelevant. The version of you that relied on softness as a shield has been shed. What remains is someone different, someone clearer, someone sharper, someone steadier, someone ruthless, not in cruelty but in self-respect. You become a person who does not bend. You become a person who sets boundaries without trembling. You become a person who speaks without softening your truth. You become a person who refuses to be intimidated by pressure. You become a person who acts without waiting for consensus. This version of you walks differently, speaks differently, chooses differently, loves differently, protects themselves differently. Your energy changes and people feel it instantly. Some step back, some step forward. Many feels threatened. A very few feel inspired. But none of that matters because you finally understand. Your life is not a democracy. Your identity is not up for negotiation. Your boundaries are not optional. And here is the final truth. You were never meant to spend your life obeying the stronger person in the room. You were meant to become the stronger person in the room. Not through dominance, not through cruelty, but through clarity, direction, and self-mastery. Ruthlessness was never about becoming someone else. It was about remembering who you were before the world taught you to be afraid of your own power. And now that you remember, you will never forget again. Before you scroll away, pause. If this message struck something in you, if even one line felt like truth spoken out loud, if you felt your own strength waking up as you listened, then don't leave silently. Subscribe so you don't fall back into the version of yourself you've outgrown. And in the comments, write this single declaration. I will no longer betray myself. Say it. Own it. Begin with it. Your evolution starts now.